Tonight's topic, Challenging Shakespeare. When has that not been a topic? For goodness sakes. This is great. Well, I want to take also a second, too. I don't know,
Mary, where'd you go?
Where are you? Up there. Yeah, we want to thank the Education Department and Bard for making these forums happen year after year. And it's a big part of what Mary does, and so we're very grateful to the Education and Mary Hartman for making that happen. Thank you. So remember that thing I told you, I don't memorize lines until they pay me? One of the things we are most curious about right now is artists talking about and talking back to Shakespeare, challenging traditional approaches. We're curious about how artists are rethinking, reimagining, and reframing the plays, how artists are responding to the texts with their own sensibilities, experiences, and ideas, using Shakespeare as a catalyst for new expressions and new works that inspire us to rethink, reimagine, and reframe our own understanding. Tonight, I would like to introduce to you our esteemed panel of challenging artists, which include Cherissa Richards. Cherissa is here to direct Harlem Duet. This is her second season with Bard on the Beach. She worked with Meg on Timing of Athens as the assistant director. She's done Directing Apprentice programs at Bard on the Beach, Shaw Festival, and the Stratford Festival. Directing credits include The Power of Harriet T., Manitoba Theatre Young People, The Game, Voice, Prairie Theatre Exchange, Meet Me at Dawn, The Last Days of Judas Iscariot at Canadian College, and a directing residency at the National Theatre School. She is also a tremendous actor. That's why I first encountered Cherissa, and now she is like the great fortune that I had earlier in my lifespan to explore and become a director. She is the business. This is Cherissa Richards. If you haven't already seen her production of Harlem Duet, it is a thing that we are very proud of to be part of, and we're really glad that you're here. This next artist is Tai, and I'm just going to read you Tai's because she sent it to me, which was awesome. This is Tai Amy Grauman. Is a Métis, Cree, and Haudenosaunee from Androsson, Alberta. She is an actor, playwright, director, and producer. Tai is an artistic associate with the Savage Society and is currently pursuing her MFA in theater practice at the U of A with a focus on her artistic research of Métis women's love stories. Yes. She was named the Métis Nation of Alberta's Outstanding Youth of 2020. Her play, You Used to Call Me Marie, is touring to Batoche Days. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Batoche Days, Métis Crossing, as well as many other Métis communities this summer. She is also an actor, a writer. She's kind of prolific. And Mary's Wedding, the Métis Love Story, Honor Beat, Grand Theatre, Thanks for Giving, the Arts Club, You Used to Call Me Marie, the Savage Production Society. She has also worked at Bard, too. She assisted Lois on our Western Taming of the Shrew, and she is an amazing writer and artist. We welcome Tai Amy Grauman. And last but not least, here he is. This is Stephen Drover. Stephen is a dramaturg and a director who has helped make over 60 shows and has taught, directed at Memorial University, Douglas College, and UBC. He has an MFA in directing from UBC and is currently pursuing an MA in theater theory and dramaturgy from the University of Ottawa, where he is researching contemporary Canadian adaptation, Shakespeare adaptation. He is in charge of new works and professional engagement at the Arts Club Theatre Company, just down the hall from Bard. We are very lucky and fortunate to have Stephen join us. Thank you so much. So, we're going to chat for about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for you all to ask questions, discuss, challenge yourselves, and see what happens out of that. First question. Gang. As society evolves, our ideas and attitudes about Shakespeare have evolved too. What aspects of Shakespeare's legacy are you happy to abandon, defy, or challenge? Tai.
My current Shakespeare project is Lois Anderson and I are adapting Romeo and Juliet into a Métis love story, because that's what I do. I tell love stories for my family. And same thing with Shrew. What Lois and I did is we really tapped into the love story between Kate and Petruchio. And so what I'm trying to spend a lot less time these days thinking about what I don't want to do. And I'm actually trying to spend all my time thinking about what I do want to do. So I guess my answer to that question is I do want to tap into the big, ridiculous, gushy, gooey love Shakespeare writes about. I actually don't have thoughts about what I want to abandon. I'll get there when I get there, and I'm going to try and not spend too much time on it. Because if I thought about all the things I don't want, I'm already a very busy woman and I just don't have time. So what I do want from Shakespeare is the love and the way he writes about love. Because I think we've gotten sloppy with love. Like, we don't talk like that. We don't write love letters anymore. We don't do those things anymore. So I guess that's what I do want to do, is tap into loving what it would be like and what it feels like to love someone the way Romeo loves Juliet, or the way that Lois and I invented that Petruchio loves Kate, and those types of things.
That's interesting, because that reminds me a little bit, particular to your interest in love, which is beautiful. And if some of you may remember, in 2020, Tai made a beautiful video that was sort of an interpretation of her Kate writing a letter to Petruchio. I think it was called Dear Pete.
Dear Pete.
Dear Pete, which was beautiful, and it was filmed up where you.
It was filmed at my parents live on a farm in Ardrossan where I grew up, and I literally just had my mom follow me on a horse. I got the nicer horse, and I was like, "Mom, take my phone," and I just rode around, and my mom took videos of me on the horse. And then I sent it to my fiddle player, and I was like, "Can you underscore this?" And then she did. My fiddle player is Kathleen Nisbet. She's an incredible Métis woman. She writes all the music for my shows and underscores everything we do. She's coming on tour with us this summer, and she just plays the fiddle and makes my life better. And then I did an audio recording of a love letter on top of that. And that's what I did for that. I still really like that piece.
You should.
I think Pete is a real person. I think he's a dumpy Cree boy from the bush. I think that's Pete.
Okay.
But I still think of him. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it was a beautiful expression of what you're talking about. We were lucky to have it. So thank you. Cherissa.
I just think, there's no rules. We gotta. I enjoy flouting the Shakespearean rules as many times as I can. I want to see people who look like me on the stage, so that's what I'm interested in. And keeping the stuff that really works, and not being afraid to be bold and brave with changing, and still telling the story in a way that speaks to me as a director and as a creator and theater creator. And I just loved, I love seeing women in men's roles. We've seen so much of that happen at the Stratford Festival for sure, and here too, I'm sure. Colleen has played many gender-bending roles in the shows here, and I love just shaking that up a little bit and shaking it loose from the cobwebs. And I think Shakespeare's work allows us to do and follow whatever vision is scratching at the backs of our minds. So I think Shakespeare challenges us to try something new and be brave and bold.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, because you were talking about rules, and Mary and I often talk about this, and hopefully at Bard we kind of have a philosophy that supports tools, no rules, because rules just sound so constrictive. Yeah. And that we often talk about how Shakespeare provides some awesome tools about how to express love or whatever else that might interest you. And how language might be successful too off the page. Drover, same question.
What would I get rid of? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean,
In
I think,
short?
yeah, that's right. Legacy, are you happy to abandon, defy, or challenge?
When you ask that question, the first thing I think of is that I could do without the racism, and I could do without the misogyny. Do you know what I mean? And I think we do a disservice to the work to say, oh, it's Shakespeare, it's not racist, or it's Shakespeare, there's no problems. Do you know what I mean? And I think if there's one thing I would encourage us to think about letting go, would be to let go of the idea of Shakespeare as a god, as someone who we're in service of, rather think about Shakespeare as someone who we're in dialogue with. So that's, the topic of our conversation, talking back to Shakespeare, which is an interesting turn of phrase, because it suggests talking to the past, but also, the idea of a petulant child, like talking back, like we have a beef with Shakespeare. But I think that there's some value in giving ourselves permission to treat Shakespeare like a colleague rather than a boss. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so letting go of that, taking the Shakespeare statue down off the plinth a little bit and saying, what can we learn from this guy? And what can he learn from us?
Wouldn't that be nice? Gosh, if he was sitting here tonight. Wouldn't that
Because
be
I think
something?
we get it wrong sometimes. I heard someone say once that if Shakespeare were alive today, his favorite forms of entertainment would be monster truck rallies and mud wrestling. And I don't know if that's true, but I think it's really fun.
Do you remember, I think I saw an episode, maybe somebody else remembers, but I think it was an episode of Blackadder.
Yeah.
And I think they ran across Shakespeare in something. It was Rowan Atkinson, and he ran across Shakespeare someplace, and he says, oh, I'm Shakespeare. I think it might have been Colin Firth. And the first thing he did was just slap him really hard, like for all of the challenges and problems that came out of some of those works, as you alluded to, racisms and misogynies and isms and things that are super problematic and challenging.
But without those things, like if it wasn't for the racial problems of Othello, we wouldn't have a Harlem Duet.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So
That's right.
The dialogue that comes out of those problems spurns really interesting things.
Yeah, Janet's response to that, which we were talking about the other day, which is kind of glorious. And do you think that there should be a moratorium on some of these plays? Because I remember our pal and colleague talking to Janet, Ayanna Thompson from the States, the US, and she was just saying, maybe we need to put those plays on the shelf for a bit. And I think that was an interesting challenge from her, as a really smart, she's seen all kinds of different theater. She's a professor of medieval and Renaissance studies, and she has been sort of given this moniker of the Othello Whisperer, which has been interesting, where she's spoken to so many black actors playing the role of Othello, and how 9 times out of 10, I guess you would say that it's deeply unsatisfying for the actor playing Othello, which is interesting. Do you think that we should put these plays on the shelves and not do them? That's open for all. That's for all of us.
I don't know.
So interesting. I think it's interesting that we're having a bit of a, what does that mean? Because that's a challenging aspect of it. If we're sitting here like uncertain about it, I think it warrants investigation. It warrants discussion. It warrants about how do you deal with the issues, the central issues in those plays that make them challenging for artists to occupy, let alone audiences to witness.
Yeah. It's a tough question to ask at a Shakespeare festival.
Yeah, it is. But hey, I got asked it. But remember, Mary, we were doing that, and one of the rioters used, hey, do you think we should do Shakespeare anymore? And it was like, whoa, okay, great. Thanks for starting that off. But that was the young folk challenging and saying, and I've been asked that in many panels.
I think there's much to challenge, absolutely, and I think that that's why I think there's we do need to shake it all up and find what works in the storytelling that we want to tell, and what is our way in, what's the story, how do we want to represent ourselves through these stories and make it speak to us,
And
speak to this audience coming here today.
Yeah, because when I see and hear some of those passages that I have grown up, or not, I didn't grow up with, I learned to love and challenge, and there was a lot of resentment sometimes as working way, because having the privilege of being able to direct a lot of these plays, that I've had some really challenging times with words, ideas, characters, where you go like, how do I solve this? How do I make this palatable? And I failed. I'm happy to sit here and say that I have failed at some of my expressions in the interpretation of those plays. And in others, I have been very fortunate. And I feel like, for me, my objective opinion, it's been something that's transcendent and wonderful and joyful and shows the best of our humanity.
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess for me,
Yeah.
the question is, who is the audience? Because at a place like this, you have to assume that Bard on the Beach, the Shakespeare Festival, people want to see Shakespeare, and they'll come in with some, and I would assume, and we assumed when we were working on Shrew, that the audience members coming in have some kind of working understanding of Shakespeare. So Lois and I are building this Romeo and Juliet that we're going to take to Métis Crossing, which is where I do all my shows, which is a big historical Métis center. And I've actually had a few people say to me, why would you do that? Like, why would you bring Romeo and Juliet here? And what's interesting about that question is I'm like, well, first of all, as an artist, I think I can do Shakespeare because I want to do Shakespeare. But second of all, they bring up a very good point, because what is the purpose? And so I think the answer I've landed on is that we're building language, like we're building French and Michif language in to the bits that don't necessarily, because some people know, like the cut him up and turn him into a million stars, everyone knows. That is pretty well known. So I guess, like, should we do Shakespeare anymore? I don't know. I have a hard time with that question, but I guess my question is, what is your target audience, and what are you trying to achieve, and how do you not leave them out by doing this elevated speech that they don't understand? I guess that's the question for me, is how do you make the speech of Shakespeare? Because sometimes I'll read Shakespeare. Drove taught me Shakespeare. I didn't understand. Like, I didn't understand, because I grew up in Ardrossan on a farm. I didn't get it. So how do you look at what he's written and make it transmittable to the people you are trying to reach? And I think that's a different conversation at so many different theaters. Like, that's a completely different conversation here than it is when I take my shows to Smoky Lake to do them by the river. Those are different things. So I guess that's kind of my answer. But like, the fact that we're still doing Shakespeare tells us that there are some truths that resonate with lots of people. I don't know if I agree with the term universal, but there are some deep truths that resonate with lots of people.
Hold that thought. That question's coming. For sure. For sure. No, but that's interesting. It's great to hear that point of view too. Drover, did you have any thoughts about that one?
Just that I think I find that question interesting, and the only thing I'd say is that it's important we keep asking that question, and it's like the question of who wrote the plays. You know, the debate of, was it the Earl of Oxford, was it Shakespeare, was it someone else? And what's interesting about that is not that we come at an answer, but that we keep asking. We keep probing, we keep putting the plays under a microscope. We go, should we be doing these? It's not important that we go yes or no, because then the conversation's over.
Right.
But that we interrogate. And every time we come back, and it's like, you know, the first thing you ask when you start a play is, why are we doing this? We ask that every time we do a play. Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Doing Shakespeare should be no difference.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? And why are we doing Shakespeare?
I will tell you that is a big part of our process here at Bard as we've evolved as a company. We do put these plays when we ask to collaborate with an artist who's going to take on the role of director, and then also what is the adaptation, what is the cut, what is it going to look like, because we have some things here at Bard that we'd like to meet. We want to get you here to have the best experience you can. And then we want you to get home at a decent hour on public transport or otherwise. So there's all kinds of different things that we have here at Bard, but part of that has been interrogating the scripts so that when we get into the rooms, when we get into the thoughts, that we try to help the plays and the productions be as successful as possible. So it's really great to ask the questions early so that we can perhaps be fortified in the rehearsal halls. And still, you'll get more interesting questions and challenges along the way. What aspects of Shakespeare, you've sort of alluded to it, Tai, what aspects of Shakespeare do you delight in?
I delight in the arguments. There's some great arguments. Even, you know, it's interesting, Janet says that Harlem Duet is not an adaptation, but a prequel to Othello. And what I love about the way that she examines argument in Harlem Duet is reminiscent, is echoes the arguments that Shakespeare has in his plays. And I think some of those are stunning arguments to be able to parse out and fight through. And those are the things that make me most excited.
Yeah. That beautiful representation of the duet, of those two instruments, if you will, having that great debate and argument in the middle of certainly Act 1, which is gorgeous, between Billy and Othello. Yeah, so it's rhapsodic.
It is.
It is, which is awesome. That's great. You talk about the love a lot.
Love,
a gush love, a love gush. Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Trover?
I think it's a good question. I love Shakespeare's narratives. I love the stories. And I think that's usually what gets adapted when we talk about making new work. It's usually we glom onto the stories and tell the stories in a new way. But I think, I mean, the reason Shakespeare was so successful in his time is because he took popular stories that people already knew and put his poetry on top of them. And so I think there's something remarkable about just the language and just, I mean, I'm not an actor, but if I was, I'd love to be able to say some of these words. You know, like one of my favorite lines is in Richard III when Elizabeth says to Richard, like, he's killed her children, he's killed her husband, he's killed everybody she loves, and now he wants to marry her because he wants the throne. And she has nothing she can do to him except speak. And she says to him, no doubt the murderous knife was dull and blunt before whetted on thy stone-hard heart, before reveling in the entrails of my lambs. She's talking about killing, he killed her, right?
Oh my goodness.
If you're going to throw that away, it's just gold, man. You know? Like, change it, like, it's just, I suppose obviously my answer is the language. That being said, it's the first thing to go when we adapt.
It's the language and the language, right? And we talk about this a lot because Shakespeare wrote a lot, and his colleagues, his contemporaries, they wrote a lot of the high-low, right? The high-low of, and that's what we talk about in terms of what makes perhaps this festival successful, our productions successful, because there is a high and a low element, I think, in lots of them, because he knew how to write for lots of perhaps demographics, age, not necessarily race, or women sometimes, but there was interesting to see that beautiful poetic language and the prosaic stuff and the super bass stuff. I was listening today to the first act of Romeo and Juliet, and you know, Alison, we were chatting about this too. We were marveling in some of the language, and in some of my productions, people have taken issue with the perhaps more body aspects, or something that it would perceive as, but oh goodness, and never take issue with some of the language, which I think is downright rude in 1598. And you're just like, good grief, if you had any idea what they're inferring or talking about.
That nurse has a potty mouth, man.
Yeah, that nurse is a total potty mouth. And so is Mercutio, a little bit more sophisticated perhaps, but it's unbelievable. Yeah. But then you hear we heard the balcony scene today, and you just go, oh, love. And all things melt away, you know, which is just, and hearing great poetry rooted in such long history. I have to tell you what was interesting. I was reading yesterday an interpretation or a version of Punjabi folktale yesterday that is inclusive of two very ancient characters that really do reflect Romeo and Juliet and the relationship, because it's being adapted to contemporary times, and the same thing happens. It's about like they fall in love. Why can't they be in love? Cultural references that are specific to this family and what they expect their daughter to do. And it was amazing how much I was thinking about Romeo and Juliet. But this Punjabi folktale is way older than Romeo and Juliet, right? And this is what we know about Shakespeare, doing some good old-fashioned picking and choosing from some other stories and Greeks. He just certainly knew how to do that along the way. What are some of aspects of Shakespeare's plays that just don't work now?
The jokes.
The jokes.
I just don't get it. I remember in Shrew, Lois saying, "It's a joke." Like, it's a joke. And we were all like, "Oh."
Yeah.
We just don't.
I second that.
Yeah,
I hope
right?
there's something, and what gets on my nerves when people go, "Oh, it's funny, Mercutio is so funny," and I go, "I don't know what he's talking about."
Yeah.
Because I'm not Elizabethan.
Yeah.
You know,
He's
that's
writing
the
for his
problem.
time.
We don't have that sensibility. We're not. That's why we don't. That's why we find the plays confusing. I don't speak Russian, so I can't understand a Russian novel. I'm not Elizabethan, so I don't understand Elizabethan sensibility. So what the hell is Mercutio talking about? It's a joke. Oh, I'm stupid. And that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
When we go,
Yeah.
there must be something wrong with me.
Does anybody here hate that when you go to see a show and you feel like a dum-dum? Yeah, me too. Because that's how I felt when I first encountered Shakespeare.
Absolutely.
Super dum-dum. And I wasn't until and even still, how many years on, because I would immerse myself, and I've been fortunate to immerse myself inside the language, learn from really great people who understand and speak it well, good colleagues who've been hanging around as long as me, and it's great. But then still, I rage at the ridiculous humor that sometimes, and I have done meritorious service to keep in the damn play, to, keep the people going, "Oh, that was such a funny line in 1598 again." So what do you do with it?
Cut them.
Cut them. Cut those
In
jokes.
shorts, that's what I do.
Then do you cut all the humor? What do you take away from Mercutio if you cut all the innuendo? And what's the risk there?
I guess the risk is that you upset folks who do not understand it, and the fans who get it. You risk upsetting them, and I don't know. Maybe you replace it with something else. If we look at I almost said it, Cherissa's show, the Scottish play.
Yeah.
Cherissa said, I don't want to mess up your show, mess up your
Right.
play. But if we look at the Scottish play, and there are these witches, and they're doing double, boil and trouble, all that stuff, and they're throwing stuff. If we did it the way it's written, then it's witches with pointy hats and it's like Halloween witches. Like, is that going to scare anyone? Or do we go, actually, this should be scary? Then we might need to make a different choice. We might need to change some of the words to achieve the ends that Shakespeare was probably trying to get at. If we want the audience to laugh, we might need to replace Mercutio's lines with something that's funny for today. Because I think, I don't know, maybe not. But I think Shakespeare would probably, if he was in the room, he'd go, no, but nobody's going to understand,
Popper and pear.
Yeah, or Old Nell, the fat
Yes.
beer wench down the road, because it was all contemporary references.
Right.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with us.
I think that's why we talk about adapting or changing, or because if Shakespeare was speaking to the contemporary audience of his time, how do we speak to our contemporary audience of this time, right? Yeah.
I think we owe that to you. I think that's very true. What can we do? Because then there's others folks who religiously, and I've seen you sit in the front row and you bring your script because
Really?
you're very excited to be here, and you open your script beautifully and you sit there in the front row, and I come out and I pretend like I don't see you, that I'm in 1598, and there you are reading your script, and you can just see them following. I used to love this when I acted more in the early days, and you'd see them following along, and it's like, oh yes, two households both alike in dignity in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, cut to, and you can just see them flipping through. Where the hell are we? What the hell's going on? What did you do with my classic? Well, it got a new engine, so to speak. Oh, yeah, that just don't work now. How, right, as we approach these plays as artists with open hearts and inventive minds, true, what are those things that just make us slam on the brakes and say, hang on a minute? The humor, for instance. What else?
What am I getting at? In some of the plays and in Shrew, this made us slam on our brakes a lot, is the way the men talk about women, where it's just like not really useful anymore. No. And the thing that really made us slam on the brakes in Taming of the Shrew was the fight where Petruchio is supposed to beat Kate down and essentially make her submissive and break her like a horse and things. And we slammed on the brakes so many times because it was like as if and it was Andrew McNee and Jen Lyons, and they were amazing, but we spent so many hours on that scene because it was like if Andrew raised his hand the wrong way or used a slightly wrong tone of voice, it went there. So, and there were points where Lois and I are like, why haven't we cut this scene? Because we had to slam on the brakes so many times and so hard. But when we figured it out, it was so satisfying. And once we figured that trick out, it was easier to take those moments out of the rest of the play. But the slamming on the brakes is essentially the way that Shakespeare, because it was a different time, that women were not equals to their male counterparts. So that is a big brake slamming for me, because it's like, how do we subvert those and change those? And that's what we did in Taming of the Shrew, to make it so that it's more equal and they're on a more of an equal playing field, because in the given circumstances that Shakespeare provided, they obviously aren't. So that was one for us that we figured out. Yeah. And Andrew McNee was just so gracious, because it was like Lois, Jen, and I knew as soon as he did something, we were like, oh, no, and then we'd go and he'd try something else, and we got it to this beautiful place where you're like, oh, they're just trying to communicate, and they love each other so much, like they like each other, so they can't communicate, is where we got it. But throughout Taming of the Shrew, we had to slam our brakes on that a lot. Yeah. And it paid off, but there were moments of, back to that question, why don't we just write a new play? Like, I remember it was like 2 days before the first preview, Lois was like, why didn't we write a new play, Tai? And Scott Bellis was sitting right in front of us, and he just burst out laughing. He was like, a bit late, gals. Like, it was like, right?
Okay, but here's my question.
Yeah.
Here's my question. Why is, and I admire so much, because you and Lois, Meg, some of our other colleagues have taken on that play. I've never taken on that play because I just don't know how. You are so much smarter and been successful with it, which I admire, and I just have never been able to go like, I don't know how to work this, because at Gazy we go, what do you think about Taming the Shrew? And I go, Gazy, I don't know how to make it funny. There's nothing funny about it for me. I don't know how to make it. And these guys have been so successful with that. But my bigger question is, why is Taming of the Shrew such an enduring, positively box office hit? Why do people come to see it in, forgive the term, droves, right? Like, it's sort of interesting to me, right? Why do they come back to see that play, knowing, and you know who drives the ticket sales for the most part in our world? The women folk. So I'm so curious about what that is. Anybody? Anybody on the panel?
I think Kate has, I want to play Kate one day.
Okay.
But Kate actually has a lot of grit.
Okay. As written by Tai Grauman? Yeah.
Well, I didn't write it, though.
No,
Shakespeare wrote
Yeah,
it. Like, even though Pete, is what I like to call him, he's horrible. And the other thing we realized about Taming of the Shrew, she's playing him the whole time. She knows what's going on the whole time. So I actually think women are able to see through that. To see, like, I think there's, I don't know, but it's an interesting question, Dean, because we also wonder that too. But, I mean, the version of Kate we made, Jen Lyons had grit. I would not have messed with her. Like, I would not have messed with her,
Yeah, that's
Kate.
off stage too. Yeah.
But she also, but this beautiful thing, so I think it's, first of all, like, Shakespeare hasn't written that many, well, he has, but leading, she's a leading lady with a bite. And I think women are able to appreciate that and see what productions are doing to interpret that bite.
Well, what happens if there's a play where the lady doesn't have a bite?
I have no idea.
You know, I agree with you, but
I
Taming
haven't-
and Taming was a tricky, like I've directed it twice, and it's really tricky. But like when you get to something like Much Ado About Nothing,
Hero.
and what happens to Hero,
Yeah.
and like she's just mistreated so badly, and in the end, I forgive you, you know, like that's the one that I go, she's not given this voice.
Yeah.
She's not given an opportunity for us to interpret it in a way.
You adapt.
Yeah, that's,
You adapt.
I guess.
They were right before the pandemic. They were doing it at Stratford, and it was a Aaron Shields adaptation of Hero.
Oh, was
and
it?
And then they wrote an epilogue for the show and a prologue, I think, speaking to the incredible misogyny of Hero and just the horrible treatment that she has and how to find her power and
Was it satisfying?
Oh, well, it was a pandemic, so it didn't never happen.
Oh, it never happened.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
But if I look forward to it when it comes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm so curious about that, and interesting that you see some lady folks nodding in acknowledgement to that, which is interesting. We're going to open it up shortly. Okay, slam on the brakes. What's your take on the popular notion that Shakespeare's plays are timeless or universal? Tai?
I don't like the term universal.
Okay, why?
Because I think it's been, I think it's a bit like the term, universal feels like it flattens the playing field in a way that isn't nuanced, if that makes sense. It kind of,
Help me
by
out.
saying something
yeah.
is universal, you're
Right.
saying that Drove and I will understand it in the same way. And we both might feel something, but it doesn't mean we're feeling the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? And I also think in theater, I feel the same about the word decolonizing. I think it's been used as a sloppy way to claim that you're doing the work, if that makes sense.
No, but tell me more about it. What does that mean, decolonizing, and what does that mean in your world?
I actually don't use that word in my work.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a bit of that thing of like, I'm not trying to not do something, I'm trying to do my thing. So I think by like leading with the term decolonizing, I mean, the other thing to know is I live in Alberta and I've started doing my plays on the bank of a river. Very different circumstances than Bard on the beach.
Of course.
But I guess for me the term decolonizing is I feel like in theater we've used it so much that nobody actually even knows what it means anymore, because there's so many different forms of what has happened. And I think as soon as I spend a ton of time trying to, it also, I think it puts the power I feel like it puts the power with all the bad things that have happened and not who we were and what we want to do. Like by and there's an incredible academic, I can't think of his name right now, who talks about this, that if we spend so much time trying to undo something, when will we get to the thing we actually want to do? Which for me is telling my stories by the river.
Beautiful.
If that makes sense.
No, totally. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Chreissa, do you have a thought about
I
that?
just think that the term universal allows for us to scapegoat Shakespeare's problems, and so, well, it's universal, so we can still do it. And I think it's a bit of a scapegoat to be lazy. And I think that we need to be more daring and challenge things more. And,
Right.
And universal for who?
Yeah. Did you talk about that at all in your process with Harlem Duet?
Yeah.
Decolonizing, the word
Not
decolonizing?
decolonizing, but I mean, you know, Harlem Duet is a black play. It's a very quintessential black play. It's a historical black play. It's a play that I've known since I was 20 years old, and for 20 years I've studied this play. Every artist of color in this, or every black artist, I'm sure, in this country knows about Harlem Duet, has studied Harlem Duet, has performed a monologue from Harlem Duet. So, but that's not even universal either, right? Like we all have different experiences and come from different backgrounds, but there's something about that Janet is speaking to a black experience there that is specific and is, to me, very interesting and powerful and exciting to explore. But I don't know, universal is too broad a topic, or too broad a word.
When I read Harlem Duet, that was one of the things that struck me, was how much I was moved by it, how much I related to it, not because of the black experience, obviously, but because of the humanity that was at the center of each of these characters and what they hoped and desired for. That was my way in, and the language and the smart argument that they used to express their point of view.
And I think that's the beauty of art, like works, theater, plays of color, that it's for everyone. It's not just for one race or one cultural group. It's for everyone, because you will find something of yourself in that play as long as it's written really well, and it is. So you will find something about yourself in that play, discover something about that you recognize, that you know, and then also you will learn about another culture. So it's beautiful that way, because you get a little bird's eye view into something you may not know about, and then you see yourself in it as well.
Drover?
I do think that there's something interesting about this word timeless, which was a word used to describe Shakespeare shortly after he died. Not like hundreds of years later. Ben Jonson wrote in the first folio that, he's for all time. But I think that, I still am adamant that Shakespeare didn't write for all time. He wrote for an Elizabethan audience, with an Elizabethan sensibility. He was an Elizabethan. But I do think that there's a timeless dialogue that's going on when we work with Shakespeare. One of my favorite scholars, a woman named M.J. Kidney, she wrote a book called Shakespeare and the Problem of Adaptation. And she talks about the problem with adapting Shakespeare is that what are we actually adapting? What is the source?
Yeah.
And so she has this concept of what she calls the work. And so what we're doing is contributing to an ongoing work. So that Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, Nomeo and Juliet, this Punjabi story, they're all valid iterations of a work that's going on that is timeless and is universal. So that it's not like Shakespeare and then an adaptation. It's actually a part of an ongoing contribution up to a dialogue that's never going to end.
Shakespeare got those stories.
Shakespeare.
Yeah, Shakespeare got those stories. The Mahabharata is the oldest storytelling around, and there's elements of that in Shakespeare's work.
That's why it's tricky to refer to Shakespeare as the original.
Yeah.
Because it's just the source material. The original keeps going back. It's an ongoing dialogue. It's the work, and that's timeless.
Yeah. That gets me all infuriated when people talk like that. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay, we're getting ready to ask some questions. At one end of the spectrum, we can say new works are inspired by Shakespeare. At the other, we can say that they're in conflict with the material. Is there a middle ground of engaging with Shakespeare? How broad is that spectrum? Within it, what are the opportunities and responsibilities you see as artists when engaging with Shakespeare today?
I think I might need to get you to read that question again. That was 3 sentences?
Like 5 questions.
Yeah, I know, but this is Mary. Mary is a fantastic brain, and she thinks that way, and I'm not good at expressing it all the time. At one end of the spectrum, we can say that new works are inspired by Shakespeare, the same way he was inspired, let's say. At the other, we can say they're in conflict with the material. Is there a middle ground of engaging with Shakespeare? How broad is that spectrum?
Very broad.
Super broad.
Yeah, it should be.
It should be one.
Yeah, well, Janet calls this, her play, Harlem Duet, a non-chronological prequel to Shakespeare's Othello. She says Othello was this man who had lived a bunch of life. It's impossible to imagine that he didn't have a wife before Desdemona. So she has conjured that Billy in this story in Harlem Duet is a version of Othello's first wife before Desdemona. You know, so it's inspired by, but like it's the playing field is vast, and you can there's so much story to be told out of the inspiration that she found out of that.
Right? That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Tai?
think Shakespeare is long gone, and there's nothing you can say about it. So I think it's pretty broad,
Okay.
right?
Copy.
Yeah, I think like when I adapted Stephen Massicot's Mary's Wedding,
Living playwright.
it was very interesting because he had a say in everything I did.
Was that good?
I don't even have an opinion because I love the Mary and Charlie we came up with.
Okay.
But as Lois and I talk about Romeo and Juliet, it's a completely different ball game because he actually can't say anything. I mean, maybe when I get up there, he's going to be like, you know, when you were 27 and you adapted, you really made me mad. But, like, I don't have to deal with that for a few years. So I think it's pretty broad. That's kind of my answer.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Drove?
I think that whenever you engage with the material in a new way, you're in part engaging in an affirmative action. Like you're celebrating Shakespeare some way or other. You're saying this is important work, so it's affirmative. But you're also challenging it because you're asking us to think about it. And adaptation theory will suggest that when we engage with an adaptation, we're actually seeing two plays at once because we're watching the new thing, but also thinking about the source. So our attention's oscillating back and forth. So you're actually like, it's invariably a process of comparison, and some of that is like, it's like this and it's not like this. So I think the spectrum is that the distance between the source and the new thing from which you can hit lots of different points. That's a really heady way of answering
Wow.
the question.
Wow. But no, but it's okay. But
I
mean,
see your
but
theory,
when
though.
you
Yeah,
talk
I do.
about
Yeah.
like the distance, right?
Yeah.
He had distance from his sources,
Yeah.
right? And
That's right,
and
yeah.
we just alluded to some very old stories. You know, before Shakespeare, the Greeks, the Mahabharata. I mean, these are ancient. And he learned a whole bunch of stuff based on that and riffed on it and went off. And I was telling Mary earlier today that my partner, who's Greek, had never seen A Midsummer Night's Dream and kept asking, why is all this Greek stuff in here? And he didn't see anything Greek except for names and references to Athens. He kept going, what the hell's going on? And I was like, Shakespeare. He took some liberties. And why the hell shouldn't we?
Fair.
Right?
Fair.
I think if Shakespeare was able to speak for himself, he would never imagine that his plays would be being performed hundreds and hundreds of years later. You know, I don't think maybe he would. Maybe he would be like, yes, I am that great.
Yeah.
But I think the legacy that we've inherited from Shakespeare is one of imitation, but also one of adaptation. Because that's what he did.
And it's some of the most adapted material, I'm sure, around, yes?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, old Gazy, he does that thing where he talks about where all the different places that you spy Shakespeare or hear Shakespeare, the influence is long and reachy for sure. And that's been, you know, carried forward and perpetuated by scholars and so forth and practitioners, et cetera, but he ain't the only dude.
Nope.
Janet Sears, Exhibit A, an amazing bard in her own right, and there's more to come. So let's take this opportunity to open it up for any questions. Riotous youth people, challenge us, for goodness sakes. Anybody have a question?
Are you going to do Phil Donahue?
No, Mary's going to be, she's going to be our person who runs around and puts the mic so that we can hear the question. Who's got a question out of all this great discussion? Or a point of view? Awesome.
You said that misogyny and racism were problems in Shakespeare and you had to deal with them. What about murder, war?
Yeah.
That's a great point. What about the violence and the murder that happens?
From my part of the world, where I come from, we're told scary stories about bad things that could happen to us to teach us a lesson and keep us from making bad choices. So I don't know I guess I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do know every single time I've been told a scary story, it's made me think about my actions and the way I walk through the world. And maybe that's what Shakespeare was trying to do.
And maybe that's how you deal with misogyny and racism.
I think it also speaks like the misogyny and racism speaks to a time when it was written. You know, what was Elizabethan audience's relationship to violence? I'm sure much different than ours. You know, so again, well, yeah, so we have definitely our own violence here for sure. But I'm curious to know, like, what is that relationship? What are the relationships to those things that we find troubling back then versus now, and how do we contend with them?
We need the pathos. We need we need that somehow. I need that catharsis sometimes, right? And that's what the theater, storytelling, film, whatever, provides for me, where I get to just go feel, oh, whoops, sorry, Chris, be reminded of our humanity, the worst, and we were talking about this, quietly before this started, about me getting to play these characters that are dubious and not great people, and what is behind all of that. I love contemplating sometimes, not all the time. I get really tired of, frankly, violence and brutality toward anybody, but certainly a lot of women. I can't watch it. But the understanding why what happens when they remove that part, that humanity, is curious to me as an actor, But I also I talk about this all the time when I'm directing, and I tell my actors, exhaust the joy. Do not come into this room unless you're willing to spend it all, because that's what makes me so excited. Who else? Who else has a question or a comment? That's a great question. Why are the histories underproduced? Dover, do you have a thought about that?
I think mostly because they appeal to an Elizabethan audience that knew those stories, and so they kind of relied, I think, on an audience already knowing the narrative before they went in. Like, we know Henry VIII, we know all the Henrys. There's so many of them, and we don't know the Henrys. But I think that the history plays find other ways of manifesting in our culture. I read this wonderful book called Shakespeare and Game of Thrones, which proposes that Game of Thrones is an adaptation of the War of the Roses, which is really interesting. I don't know if it really holds a lot of water, but it's a really exciting way of saying this is how we have that intertextual relationship with these things. And I think the history plays find a way of getting into our consciousness, but I agree with you, they're not done a whole lot.
We've enjoyed great success with our histories, and we've had other ones where people go, what the hell is going on, right? Because they don't have that notion or that understanding about it, and you practically have to draw a map, and even then, is it on the Google?
Yeah.
Don't travel without the phone. But yeah, I still think they'll get produced, because there's great passages inside those plays. Henry VIII, we've never done Henry VIII. And there's still, there's amazing passages and relationship between Catherine Aragon, who is just a fantastic historical figure, and I would love to see her represented on the stage and what that means. And then there's adaptation, Kate Hennig, right, in her trilogy of plays. Have you read any of those ones? Kate Hennig wrote The Last Wife, The Something Other, The Good Wife. I think there's a whole bunch of talking about basically contemporary ideas of Henry's wives, and not Six, the musical. Not that one, if you like musicals, whatever. Not my cup of tea. Who else? There we are. Yes. Kai.
So, now that we've established that there are some issues with modern day Shakespeare, do you believe that people will continue to adapt and change Shakespeare so they can still enjoy it, or do you believe that Shakespeare will start to sort of lose popularity and begin to die out as people start to get maybe frustrated or tired of trying to adapt these plays to modern day standards?
Well, thanks, Kai. That's a great question. Anybody?
I think we're going to start to see Shakespeare that's a lot less like a lot further from the first folio. Like I think we're just going to keep getting further and further, where maybe then I think it'll get to a point where doing Shakespeare as Shakespeare wrote it is the anomaly. I actually think that's where we're headed. I don't know what you two think, but
Who knows? I don't know. I can't tell the future, but I think that you know, we're hungry for new stories for sure. We're always hungry for new stories, but it takes time to develop new stories, and it takes theater companies to take the leap to put those new stories on their stages. Yes. So.
Shakespeare adjacent combo platter, bard, the word bard. That's our gift. That's our thing. Because he's not the only. He's one of them, right? But there's a whole bunch of bards in the world. And they don't necessarily use the Old English word, bard, but they use something else. But my point is writers and other people who tell stories. And there's no new stories. Mark my words. There is no new stories. We are just, you know, here's... We're adapting. We're adapting. So I think 450-something years later, I think it will continue, and I think it must evolve. This festival must evolve. It has evolved. You look at the beginning of Bard, there's no question. Gazy would sit here and tell you, you know, this is where it began, and this is where we are now. We are a bard for the times, and that's what we intend to remain. Otherwise, what's the point of putting up these tents and gathering here? We are deeply fortunate. We are grateful for what Shakespeare has given us in terms of providing opportunity, and we will take those words forward. We will bend, shape, challenge, and tell those stories along with others.
I think that there's just talking about, do we move further away from Shakespeare? I think about, like, one thing history has taught us is that there's patterns in our relationship with Shakespeare. Like, after Shakespeare died, sometime later, they weren't doing Shakespeare at all. They were doing adaptations by Colley Cibber and Nahum Tate and these guys that were changing the endings of plays. And then they fell out of fashion. And then the 17th century editors came in and started removing words. And then there was a big movement to do it works no cuts. And it just kind of goes like this, you know? It's almost like being at a party where you're mingling and you come back to somebody and you go and you leave them again, you come back. Well, like, it's not going anywhere. There's always going to be an appetite for the works as they are, but there's also going to be an appetite for contemporary sensibilities embedded in those works.
We're not the first. We're not the first to challenge it, move it, shift it, change it. As you said, it's gone in and out and in and out. You know, what's new on the Rialto? And on that note, we have one last question. We have time for one last question. Thank you.
So, Dean, you were saying earlier that you wouldn't touch Taming of the Shrew with a barge pole.
No, barge pole. That was an amendment by you.
No, I know, but you know.
I know what you
mean.
mean.
I was wondering if, with the other two directors there, are there any Shakespeare plays that you would not touch?
Good question.
I don't know.
Measure for Measure.
No, I find Measure for Measure really interesting, really exciting. I get icky feelings around Merchant of Venice.
Yeah.
You know, like there's 3 or 4 where I go, you gotta, if you don't nail it, you're gonna really, Merchant of Venice, Taming the Shrew.
I have to tell you, Mary and I had we had the good fortune to participate in the Shakespeare Association. We belong to, what is it, Mary? Where is it? Shakespeare Association. Theater Association. Yeah, Theater Association. And we saw some actors when we were pandemicked and we were in Zoom. We were in Zoomed. Pandemicked and in Zoomed. We watched some actors do some incredible work from all over the world. But this one actor particularly, it was an older Asian actor, and he did the speech from Merchant of Venice, Shylock. He did that speech, and as an older Asian man who had experienced nothing I can imagine, it was visceral, hearing him, you treat me like this, should I not? You treat me like that, have not, you know, it was all of those things, and I just thought, oh my gosh. seeing that with an older Asian man and the experience of what he's gone through. But then there's the rest of the play that you have to deal with that is very challenging. And yet every time we do it, it sells every last ticket.
Merchant of Venice.
What's that about?
Interesting.
Hey guys, thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.